glacial rhythms forget us as we forgot them.
So I've just recorded a second interview with Geoff Dann about his book, The Real Paths to Eco-Civilization, and this time we had much better production quality. And however, due to some technical reason, which is defies me at the moment, every minute or 2 minutes there is a little skip in the video, and it pauses for about 2 or 3 seconds, and then it frees back up again, and it moves on. And so this is just a an interference pattern that has come to us on this interview. It doesn't actually, you can actually hear all of the words. It's just like this little break every minute or three or so. So, like, stay with it. This is a fascinating conversation, really interesting concept, trying to get to the roots of philosophy that underpins a future civilization. So bear with me. We're going to do another interview later on once all the tech is sorted to go deeper still in this story. So allow me to introduce Geoff Dann and his book, The Real Paths to Eco-Civilization. Enjoy. So I am talking with Geoff Dann, who is in Wales, United Kingdom. And Geoff has written and published a book called The Real Paths to Eco-Civilization, which is a subject very dear to my heart. And so welcome, Geoff. And would you first of all just give us a little background about yourself and how it is that you came to be writing a book?
Well, that's a long story, and it's probably worth telling it properly, given the context. When I was growing up in the 1980s, science and nature was my thing. It's one of my main interests. And I was aware of the climate change issue as it came, as it became understood that it was serious, and how serious it was, and it was a real threat to the future of civilization. And I got involved in politics in my teens, and it then became quite clear to me that the politics was not going to be, and there was not going to be an adequate political response because the politics was too difficult. It was too inconvenient to admit the truth. People had too much other agendas. This Another thing I say, I rejected Christianity aged 12. So my mother used to take me to church, and there were no answers worth me, and it was just a waste of my time. I'd fully rejected that by the age of 12. But that made me a bit lost, and I kind of invented my own religion, which was about truth. It was about not lying to people. It was about seeking the truth. It was about defending the truth as I saw it from other people attacking it, just to give myself some meaning and called, just give. I had a religion shaped hole in my life, and I filled it up with that. But this has led me to quite a dark place because I couldn't lie to myself about the seriousness of climate change or about the failure of the political response. And eventually I ended up, my mental health deteriorated, and I was ended up in a psychiatric hospital, having been declared detached from reality, psychotic, because the way I was trying to say, look, people, this is really, really serious. If we don't deal with it, this is going to bring down civilization. And they treated me as if I was mad. It took me many years to realize that there was actually nothing wrong with me, and that I was simply trying to face reality in a society that wasn't willing to go there. Anyway, in my 20s, I became a nihilist, basically. I gave up on my own future. I gave up on the future of humanity. I just said, well, it can't be saved. It's a train wreck. It's coming. Collapse is coming. I might as well just enjoy myself, take one day at a time. That all changed when I was about 33. So the social media had come along, and I was well into the. I was actually quite active. I was Richard Dawkins' forum administrator at one point. So I was an active atheist, naturalist, anti-religion person. But I came through that interactions with the people there to understand that there was something wrong with materialism. That the idea that we can explain consciousness in terms of matter didn't add up, didn't stack up. That there was a fundamental gap in our explanation here, and therefore a fundamental gap in my own worldview. And this led me deep deep down a rabbit hole. I followed a white rabbit and ended up in Wonderland, basically. And some very strange things happened to me that didn't fit into my worldview. This led me to quit my software engineering career and go and study philosophy. So I spent 3 years studying philosophy and cognitive science, trying to make sense of all of this. And when I came out of that degree, when I finished my degree, I couldn't get back into software engineering. And I started trying to write a book. And that book was about how science and mysticism actually belong in. We need both of them in this world. They don't have to be fighting forever. It's a bogus conflict. It's based on misunderstanding. And I felt I understood both of these, and that this was stopping us. This was at the core of our inability to fix society. Because this is all to do with what's true and what we know about what's true. And so I started writing a book about that, and it immediately became mixed in with the climate change and collapse thing. So I'm trying to write about two things at the same time, about science and mysticism, that conflict in the West between science and religion, and why that is based on a misunderstanding and is wrong, and that there's room for both, and that we must accept collapse, that collapse is inevitable, and that we therefore must view it as the beginning of a big change in society, where we come to realize that our relationship with the truth is broken. We're not willing to accept reality, and there is a better way of looking at it. But it took 17 years and 4 attempts to actually finish this book, because every time I tried to write it, I ran into problems either with my own argument or with problems making it a viable book that people would actually want to read. And so I would try and write 50,000 words and then leave it for 3 years and come back and try again, during which time I actually became a foraging teacher. I ended up writing 2 books about foraging, one of which has become a best-selling, most comprehensive book on fungi foraging ever published in Europe, in English. So I wrote 2 other books, one on edible mushrooms and on edible plants, and I still never finished the book that I originally started writing, because I couldn't get the format right. I couldn't get it was, but I was learning all the time through these failed attempts. Eventually I realized that I could kind of mix together the different approaches that I'd taken, and so I ended up with a book which was, it's part philosophy, conventional philosophy, it's part fiction, it's part autobiography, and it's only by mixing these things together that I can paint the big picture that I want to paint, which is that in actual fact something has gone philosophically wrong with Western society and Western thinking. We are fundamentally detached from reality, and it doesn't have to be this way. And the message of the book is really that there is a better way, that we are actually, I think, on the verge of a big paradigm shift in our understanding of truth and reality. And it looks hopeless at the minute. It's just like nobody knows what to believe. Everything's a lie. It's all completely confusing. But that's because we are kind of at rock bottom as a society. We are facing breakdown, not just ecological breakdown, political breakdown, economic breakdown, but a breakdown in our cultural understanding of what we are, who we are in the world, what humans' place in the cosmos is. We're deeply confused. Western society is in a mess, basically. So that is the end of my long answer, and I hope that gives us some scope to discuss where we are as a society and where we're going to go.
Yeah. So what attracted me to your to what I learned of your book, and that led to us having this conversation, is my work through Vita Sapien has got very, very similar narrative to yours in terms of seeing that there is no real distinction between spirituality and rationality, that these things are effectively from the same source, and that ultimately that this schism is at the root of the climate and ecological crisis. You talk about collapse. I mean, what's your reading of collapse in terms of where we are now and what's inevitable in the coming years or decades?
The inevitability comes from, well, there's 2 things. One, we've run out of time. It's too late to avoid really serious, catastrophic, irreversible climate change. It's like how to change the direction of an oil tanker, and we're still having a big argument on the bridge. No one's even moved the steering wheel yet. The thing isn't changing direction, so we've run out of time. But there is a fundamental problem in that no one can take control of the steering wheel because we can't fix it. We don't know how to reform this civilization from the inside, and that means it's guaranteed to collapse because there's no other way it can change. If it's unsustainable and unreformable, then it's not a question of if it's going to collapse. It's the question of when, how deep the collapse is, and in fact, once you've accepted that we can't reform it, once you've accepted that we're not going to change voluntarily, then it ceases to be. Well, it's still bad. Obviously, it's terrible. It's the collapse of civilization and the worst humanitarian catastrophe there will ever be. But since you can't save this version of civilization and you can't reform it either, then you just have to view that as the beginning of a transformation. And then the question becomes, what do we want to transform into? We must have a coherent picture of some final destination. If we rule out extinction, then, and we're not going to go back to the Stone Age, we're not going to forget what books are for. So we've got to keep trying to reinvent civilization until we finally get it right. So we might as well start asking the question whether civilization is going to collapse or not. Whether you're advocating collapse or degrowth, it doesn't matter. We've still got to figure out what a truly sustainable, ecologically sustainable civilization looks like. And once we've answered the question, what does it look like? Then we can start asking questions about how do we get from here to there? What are the different options? What's the least bad path? I'm saying that's the question we need to ask. We can't just be like rabbits in the headlights. Like, civilization's going to collapse. And so many people go to Reddit's our collapse. Then in trying to talk about what's going to happen after the collapse, it's just like you're attacked. People don't even want to do that. That's too much. Yeah. No, that's too. It's easy to just say, "Oh well, civilization is going to collapse. We're going to go back to the start."
Yeah.
Age, we're going extinct. That stops thinking. No more thinking. And the chances of us going extinct are infinitesimally small. We're too smart. Lots of bad stuff is going to happen. I'm not denying collapse, but we've got to think about what comes next. Yes, managing the collapse, and okay, well, this is an important note as well. People focus on adaptation. Look at deep adaptation, Jen Bendel. This is really, really important. These people are very close to my way of thinking. But there's much the same things. If you're talking about constructing an eco-civilization and adapting to the future, it's all part of the same thing. Trying to survive the collapse and trying to construct an eco-civilization aren't clashing goals. They are largely overlapping. So, next question.
Yeah. So look, your view and mine's very similar. You're what I refer to as a gloomer, as to make a distinction with a doomer. The doomers are like the guys you're talking about on the Reddit that say, "Oh, collapse is coming." There's nothing to talk about on the day after.
The ones who've given up.
Yeah, and for me, that's just unethical. I think that's actually more of a mindset than it is a reading of science. But having said that, if you look at the trajectories paper, the trajectories of the Anthropocene in the trajectories of the Earth system in the Anthropocene, that's basically saying that somewhere between 1 and 2 degrees above baseline, there's a cascade of climate tipping points that could take us to, like, effectively the hothouse, which could quite easily take out most life on Earth. So I think there is a plausible scenario where we do go extinct. But I think, like, to your point, we're too fucking smart for that, and we'll get on top of it. But that waking up hasn't happened, and your oil tanker analogy is good because there's still people arguing about whether we should turn the wheel.
Yes, but I think we need to talk about climate change scenarios because there's a fundamental misunderstanding here. What people are being misled over what action is currently being taken to deal with climate change. In actual fact, arbitrary targets in the future, how much renewables by 2050, this is all irrelevant. In actual fact, what matters in climate change is the long-term net climate change. So it's how much carbon have we moved into the atmosphere? How much net climate change is there by the time we stop changing the climate? There's no use at saying, well, this is where we'll be in 2060 if we just keep burning all the fossil fuels anyway. And there is in fact only one way that we can limit net climate change, and that is to leave economically viable fossil fuels in the ground forever. And nobody's even talking about that. So everything that we're currently being sold as reacting, dealing with climate change, in fact, isn't dealing with the real problem at all. It's just stringing out the available amount of fossil fuels for longer. And if it all ends up in the atmosphere anyway,
Yeah.
then the same. So in actual fact, it looks like we are heading. There's no way we're going to stick to 2 degrees. We are heading for 5 degrees, 6 degrees. And nothing that's being done at the minute suggests that's going to be limited at all. We are heading for the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
But even that won't make us extinct. And this is another thing that people don't understand. Because you get to a certain point, and I can argue exactly where it is, 6, 7, 8 degrees. And the atmosphere starts losing heat to space faster than the greenhouse effect can warm it up. So you get to somewhere like the Eocene maximum. And that really is about the limit. And after that, there is no more climate change, partly because humans won't be extinct. We'll still be clinging on in the tops of mountains and probably in the polar regions. There's enough inhabitable space even there for humans to cling on. But so I don't think we're going to go extinct at all. Even in that situation, even if the worst case scenario for climate change, I don't think we're going extinct. And so even then, we've got to, hopefully we will learn our lesson before it gets to quite that stage. What my hope is once we get to the point where it has become clear to everybody that you can no longer deny that business as usual is ending, that civilization as we have known it is finished, then the whole of society can't go on living in denial, and big questions are going to be asked that currently we aren't even asking those questions. But once they do start being asked, then there's real scope for change, because people are not going to accept rubbish. They're not going to accept any more of the nonsense, because they're not going to be terrified about their own future and the future of their own country. And so then we have to start having the real debate, the real discussion about what we can do to even if we can't stop climate change, what we can do to adapt, how we learn the lessons of what went wrong, and the top level structure of how we build a civilization which doesn't repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah, look, I love it. I love it. I like your optimism that it's not possible that we can go extinct. I'll buy that, and it's like we're planning a massive party. Let's start planning for the hangover, right? And I think it's a really important thing is that whether we go extinct or not, if we go extinct, then it's a bit of a moot point anyway. But assuming
it's pointless thinking about it.
we still got to actually be thinking about what a new civilization is going to be looking like once the climate impact starts to wind back, as fundamentally as a result of the human pressure coming off. And so, okay, so in the philosophy that I work with, I refer to this future time as the verdant age. So I don't refer to it as a type of civilization per se, so much as a time when humans and the living planet are acting in synergy. In one of the comments you made earlier, which I thought was really interesting, was about Chernobyl, and about how Chernobyl nuclear area that was contaminated from the explosion back in the day has been roped off. An exclusion area is actually in a very abundant wildlife location, as is indeed apparently a Bikini Atoll, where people don't go anymore, where they set off nuclear bombs in the 40s. So how does that commentary fit in with the narrative around eco-civilization?
Well, the first thing to note from that is that if we give an ecosystem a chance to rebound, we just leave nature alone, it is exceptionally good at recovering. Even if it doesn't recover back into the way it was before, it won't leave a vacuum there. It will come and fill that space with life, and the process will continue. All we have to do is leave it alone. There are big questions there to do with where we have to think about people like Derek Jensen, who are accelerationists, who say that, and I'm not convinced that they really mean it, but they say that they're trying to bring civilization down quicker. They're just
Sure. Yeah.
civilization is the problem. We've got to bring it down. And I understand why they're saying it, and Chernobyl is relevant because that's an example of, you know, if the quickest way you bring civilization down, and what we might think of as the worst possible outcome is a nuclear war. But in actual fact, we have to be distinguished between what's good for us and what's good for nature, because the devastation of a nuclear war, sure, it would be terrible, lots of to both ecosystems and to humans. But there's no, we shouldn't judge because it's terrible for humanity that it's just as terrible for the wildlife, because ecosystem, you know, there is definitely an argument that a quicker, deeper, more severe collapse, a crash, a nuclear war might in the long run turn out to be better. It might actually lead to a shorter path to a sustainable future.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and that's that's a really important question there.
Yeah. Yeah.
About I mean, that's an extreme example, but this is how do we get from, because minimizing human suffering in the short term, I mean, look at the degrowth movement. The degrowth movement says we've got to minimize human suffering, we've got to try and save as many people as possible. In actual fact, this may be, however well meant, it may actually be misguided. It all depends on how you do your ethics. How do you judge what's the least bad outcome? If you can't save 8 billion people because it's the most optimistic scenario is only 2 billion survive, is there really any justification for continuing to even try? This is called the politics of collapse. So, you know, I actually refer to this as collapse politics, which is politics as it happens when everybody actually admits that we can't keep going like this. And it looks very different to politics as it currently is. And I've rambled a bit, so it's probably time for you asking.
No, that's good. So you've, okay, so what we've done, we sort of fleshed out a little bit this broader concept of eco-civilization. So tell back to the book specifically. So, you know, how is the book structured? Are you actually mapping out like 10 scenarios of what that civilization might look like, or have you got another approach?
No, it's not like that at all. In fact, it's not like any other book I've ever read. It's very difficult to explain because we're currently in a situation where a lot of people see the world like they see it at the minute. I'm trying to get people to see the world and see the potential future of humanity in a very different way. And to do that, I have to lead the reader through a thought process, and I need to lead them to somewhere where they're not expecting to go. And so it's very difficult for me to actually just summarize that, because it was necessarily takes, you have to actually take your journey through the book to understand how what I mean by that. So it is a mixture of different styles, and the top structure is easy to explain. Part one is what I see as the current problem, and I mean the problem with Western thinking and Western worldviews. It's a philosophical problem, a very deep philosophical problem. And so part one is an exploration of that problem. Part two then completely changes. It begins with a fictional timeline starting from now, heading to the establishment of an eco-civilization several hundred or 1,000, I think 1,500 years in the future. Then the next chapter is the beginning of a fictional book which mixes science, mysticism together in a way that it's never been mixed together. So, and then I go back to autobiography, and then I explain how does it all come together. It finally comes all back together by saying what we need is a new epistemic deal, is what I call it, a new understanding about our relationship with truth and reality, and what we can actually say about what we know and what we don't know, or what are open questions, and what we can definitely say isn't true. And this epistemology, about epistemology, means to do with knowledge. A new deal to do with knowledge that ends the bogus war between science and mysticism, and makes sure that truth comes before politics, that we establish what's real before we start asking questions about what's right and wrong. Because at the minute, we don't care about what's real. We go straight in with what should be before we've established what is.
Yeah. Okay. And so back to this, this sort of these two parts of this equation, which is the science or the rational part, and then the, you've heard of religious, but spiritual. So you're talking about an eco-civilization. Are you talking about a civilization which is underpinned by eco-spirituality?
No, not entirely. I'm talking this, what I call the new epistemic deal, is not, it's not a spiritual system, it's not a religion. What it does is make sure that that world is not illegitimately shut off. In effect, it demonstrates that the word does mean something, that there is such a thing as spirituality in a world where you take science absolutely seriously. It shows people that there is a door, but it makes no attempt whatsoever to lead anybody through it, or act as some sort of guide to what's on the other side. That's what spiritual systems, religions do. And I'm in that book acting as more as an arbiter, as someone who wants to bring a bigger group of people together, including skeptics, not dogmatic materialistic reductionists, but people who say, I've never experienced anything spiritual, and I don't want you to force me to believe it. You've got no right to force me to believe in things I've got no direct scientific evidence for. You may have experienced something that tells you that this stuff is real, but you can't force it. So what I'm saying actually needs to underpin this civilization is this new epistemic deal, a new understanding about how we can approach these problems, because the discussions we've got to have about politics, about economics, about ethics are so very difficult. We're talking about billions of people dying. This is terrible, really difficult stuff. So what I'm saying is, in actual fact, we need to base our whole thinking, the whole debate that's got to happen, and it's going to be a massive debate, on a set of rules and understandings that ensure that we know where we're starting from, that we all understand what reality is, that there is actually such a thing as reality, and we can know something about it, and that science doesn't have all the answers either. And at the minute, there's just epistemic chaos. There's just, and this is largely the fault of postmodernism, but we were already in trouble before that. There's just a free-for-all where anyone's allowed to believe anything. We must respect everything, even really intolerant religions. We must respect them. We must give everyone the right to. I don't want to get into the politics here, but I think people know what I'm talking about. There is no respect for truth or realism. Everyone must be allowed to believe whatever they like. And it's not just the politics. In a way, this applies in science as well. Because cosmology is broken, because we've got no idea what quantum mechanics means, because it is radically open, because we've got no science of consciousness. There is no official worldview. There's no official cosmology. So even if you're in the scientific rationalist side, you've still got this political understanding that everyone has a right to believe what they like. You can't go around saying, well, what a particular interpretation of quantum mechanics is actually true, and making a case as to why it's true, because that intrudes on other people's right to believe in whatever interpretation they want to believe in. It's in a way, it's another version of anyone can believe what they like. There is no collective shared understanding of what reality is, and this
Yeah.
isn't just a political problem; it's a deep philosophical problem.
Yeah.
And the conflict between science and mysticism in the West is absolutely it just illustrates it. That's where there's got to be a way of understanding reality where all of this makes sense together. This is
Yeah.
what we don't have. We don't have in the West any integrated, holistic worldview which takes account of all these things and in a single system that actually makes sense. And in fact, not only do we not have such a thing, but we've completely given up hope that we ever will. This is partly the postmodernists have done this. They have engineered a situation, and they believe it's the truth, that it's just impossible to ever solve this problem, and that this epistemic chaos, this free-for-all on reality and truth, is a permanent situation and it can't ever be fixed. And that is deeply wrong as far as I'm concerned. I do believe that reality must make sense. There must be a way where all of this stuff fits together in a single worldview which makes sense.
Yeah. So in my work through Vita Sapien, I spent a lot of time reading up on the Cro-Magnon, who are the first of the Homo sapiens to arrive in Europe, and I've been writing about them in a fiction work, and so doing a lot of research. And one thing that's really clear to me about those cultures and indigenous cultures that survive intact today, same, is that there is no separation between the knowledge and the spiritual and the beliefs, the knowledge and the belief. There is none of this divide. And I'm just thinking about you as a person who teaches foraging, that when you go out into the forest, okay, there is a pragmatic understanding of how the forest functions and where to go to find the edible fungi, right? Some of which are edible and some of which are poisonous. There is a reality there. And if you're not in touch with that reality, then you could either go hungry or you can end up dying because you ate the wrong,
Yes, this is absolutely true.
Okay. And just sorry, one other thing, but also, particularly in the way that indigenous people identify themselves as a part of the forest, which comes back to this, one of the sort of definitions of sustainability of spirituality is people seeing themselves as part of a greater thing, is that there was no distinction between the spiritual and the rational in the mind of the Cro-Magnon. And then, of course, they were around for around 30,000 years. And then we moved into agriculture. And then we had the axial age, which is when the wheels totally came off the ideas that society was led. How do you respond to that?
Sorry, what's the question? I mean, it's absolutely true.
Just talking about the
animistic
Cro-Magnon as an example of a culture who didn't have this divide.
Right, yeah, certainly it's true for everything before the invention of agriculture. That's absolutely true. They were all basically animists.
Yeah.
And yes, the material world, the spiritual world, there was just one world, and they were an integral part of it. There's still no separation, and it's true. Teaching foraging, absolutely, people are trying to get back to that, and in a way, I mean, it's never going to be quite real because you can always go and stop at McDonald's and have your lunch, dinner on the way home. But certainly, that's part of the allure of foraging. The question really is, right, there are anarcho-primitivists. Let's talk about anarcho-primitivists. These are people who actually think that we can go back there, that they say civilization is broken and that the only way that it can't be fixed, There is no such thing as an eco-civilization. It's fundamentally unsustainable, and that they want to go back to some previous time in history, either hunter-gathering or subsistence agriculture. And I think we can't go backwards. We have to find a way to learn. We have to learn about this, understand what's gone wrong, but we can't just forget civilization. We can't that Holocene ecosystem for a start is gone, so there's no ecosystem for us to go back to. We've wrecked it. Most of those species are extinct. But anyway, nobody's going to. It's like a ratchet. We like it or not. We've got books. We've got knowledge that's just too valuable. People are not going to stop trying to invent civilization. So we've got to invent civilization in a way that somehow gets back to this way of thinking that's integrated, where it all makes sense, where understanding the natural world becomes a sacred duty. And so we've got to invent something new. And I think both you and I understand that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a case of how we go about inventing that new thing. But there's no question that it has to be, it has to have that magical ingredient that was lost, when there's a whole sequence of it. Firstly, it's agriculture, then it's cities, then you talk about monotheism. Then it was science, then it was the Industrial Revolution, now it's AI.
Yeah.
It's becoming more and more, and it's just like, but it's heading for a crash. It can't go on like it is. For a start, it's taking up more and more resources. There's still more and more people. Everybody wants more. Everybody's trying to improve their standard of living. It's quite clearly we are on a collision course with reality, and so we come back to the same thing. It's going to crash. So we are left with the question of how do we do it? And what you've said there is just one of the many things that we've got to take into account, which is to do with, and it's to do with cosmology. It's to do with understanding what a human is, what an animal is, what a conscious animal is, what intelligence is, how ecosystems work. And not just you can't just understand ecosystems as material flesh and bone. Ecosystems involve animals with agency. They are conscious creatures, and their consciousness, not just the humans but the other animals in it, they're conscious. That's also part of the system, and that's what's missing. That's what's missing from the scientific view of reality. If science can't even define what consciousness is, how can it have a complete understanding of an ecosystem, of an ecosystem? Because consciousness is part of that ecosystem, and it's not just a small part of that ecosystem. Consciousness is an integral part. All of the animals are in it are conscious. So the crisis in materialistic science offers an opportunity to find a way to bring some of that back, and that's what a lot of people are trying to do, which is why you've got Robin Wall Kimmerer braiding Sweetgrass, you've got Merlin Sheldrake and Entangled Life, and they are in their own way trying to do this. They're trying to say it's not just the material world, you've got to understand it on a spiritual level, and there's various ways of doing it. But what they're not doing is actually building a solid bridge back to science, back to the problems in cosmology, the problems in quantum metaphysics, the problems in cognitive science and philosophy of mind, excuse me. It's no use just having a patchwork of bits of scientific ecology and bits of mystical poetic stuff. It still doesn't all add up. We need to go further, and we need to make it add up. And where I'm going with this, the problem is, I think, that materialism doesn't make sense. Materialism cannot account for consciousness, but there are currently no alternatives. Materialism remains the dominant paradigm because none of the alternatives offer a compelling. They're not good enough. All of them, in fact, there's three different main varieties. There's dualism, there's idealism, there's panpsychism. So one of them says that consciousness is this separate realm that's always been there since the beginning, and how do these two realms interact? Idealism says, well, the material world doesn't exist at all, there's only mind. But how does that explain why brains appear to be necessary for consciousness? That doesn't make sense either. Panpsychism says, well, everything's conscious. Even rocks are conscious, but I don't believe rocks are conscious. So this lack of an alternative paradigm makes it well, okay, the materialists say, you can say materialism doesn't make sense, but there's nothing else out there that makes any more sense. So I'm going to go on being a materialist, and the result is a stalemate. And just waxing lyrical about indigenous practices and wishing that we could go back to being hunter-gatherers doesn't help. That's all just part of the current status quo, of the current stalemate. We need some bigger idea than that. We need to actually fix these problems. And it's no just good just fixing, it's no use trying to fix consciousness without trying to fix cosmology, or trying to fix cosmology without fixing quantum metaphysics. It's all one system. That's the whole point. It's all one big system. And so it's got to be all one big answer that all makes sense together. And at the minute, nobody's even looking for that. Nobody's even looking for it. There's certainly nobody in academia is, because they're all highly specialized. There's nobody, even two different bits of philosophy, that analytic and continental, that barely recognize each other's existence, let alone science and all of the other stuff. And even all the individual sciences are siloed. They don't talk to each other. They can't. Well, they do, but even a little bit. No one is looking for the whole elephant. Absolutely, academia congratulates itself when it starts looking for a whole leg. It doesn't. Nobody is looking for the whole elephant. It doesn't work like that. So academia is a serious problem in that it gatekeeps the status quo, and they aren't looking for some radical new system to completely rethink everything, because that's turkeys voting for Christmas, and they don't do that. Yeah. So we have deep problems.
Okay, so in the to try and paraphrase you a little bit, then the whole elephant can be found in your book.
Well, something closer to the whole elephant could be found in that book. I mean, that's an interesting story, actually, because when I was writing that book, I knew that there was that I had a puzzle, a piece of my. I was assembling. I'm trying to assemble the jigsaw puzzle, the whole elephant, and I had enough of it, and to write the book and claim that this is, it's beginning to look like an elephant, this thing. But I always knew that there was a critical piece of my puzzle missing. And the critical piece of the puzzle was, what is it about brains that makes them uniquely capable of hosting consciousness? Why is it that only organisms with brains seem to be conscious? And there's another question of this. It's not just because I link this with the collapse of the wave function, with the measurement problem in quantum mechanics. So there's another question. What is it about brains that collapses wave function, if you believe that interpretation of quantum mechanics? And this is the sort of thing that Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff are looking for with their orchestrated objective reduction. But their answer doesn't quite work either, because they go for microtubules, which are constant across the whole of the animal and plant and fungi world. They all have them, all eukaryotes have them. So that's not specific to brains. So I knew, and I wrote in that book, I said, well, there's a missing piece of this information. There's something, and it's got to be some physical thing, at least I wrote in the book, makes brains different to anything else, any other object in reality, that they are capable of becoming conscious. But what is it? And without that piece of the puzzle, it wasn't a whole elephant. But what happened is when I was beginning to promote the book, and I started hanging around in places where people are interested in this sort of thing, I came across someone who had come up with some theory that he'd invented by AI, and his theory looked enough like my missing puzzle piece. And what he'd done is find a way of saying, well, the information, don't think of it in terms of a material thing that makes a brain collapse the wave function and be able to host consciousness. Think of it in terms of something purely informational, in terms of mathematics, that it couldn't keep going in terms of its information structure. And that this was also something to do with agency, that it's to do with the organism making a decision or having a preference. And this was enough and I just took his system, he called it quantum convergence threshold. Greg Capanda, his name is. And I thought, well, okay, I can plug this into my system, and it looks like, you know, the problem is it wasn't quite the right puzzle piece. It needed to be hammered in a bit, you know, it didn't quite fit. But since then, I've now sat down and thought, actually, I don't need his system. What I need is to actually work out what that puzzle piece should be. What am I actually looking for? And when I did that, I realized that in actual fact, it not only did it explain consciousness and the measurement problem in a way that brought the whole thing together in a way that made sense, but it also provided an explanation how consciousness can affect things in the outside world, that it's not just your body. And this feeds into things like synchronicity and actually what people call paranormal. I don't like that word. Which is coming us back to spirituality. And then in actual fact, the same puzzle piece, the same metaphysical equation explains what the very first conscious worm doing, its preference to move left or right, explains also global it's paranormal effects like synchronicity, that both can be explained by the same thing. They're both to do with value and meaning. There's no value or meaning in the material world, and there's no value or meaning in pure information either. You need consciousness. You need consciousness, and consciousness is what we do. The role of consciousness is to produce value and meaning. And so it is actually the critical thing that makes a brain capable of collapsing the wave function and hosting consciousness is the ability to have a perspective, to make a value judgment, and to be able to understand meaning. And once you've done that, then the universe can pick a reality. It can say, well, these are the possible physical possibilities, and that one's worth that much to me, and that one's worth that. And so there's actually a way of choosing. And this okay. So I've rambled a bit, but that is what I required. And so since then, since I wrote the Real Path to Ecosystem, Real Path to Ecocivilization, I've got hold of that missing puzzle piece, and I'm now working on a completed theory, which hopefully is the whole elephant. So I've now begun work on another book called The Sacred Structure of Reality, which is actually trying to explain how that whole system works. The Real Path to Ecocivilization is kind of heading towards that, but it's more to do with politics and psychology and the way society works. So it's very much to do with diagnosing the problems of our own civilization rather than trying to produce a new philosophical system for building a new one.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. So tell us how we can get hold of the book. Where would one go if one wanted? Is it available as a paperback, hardback, ebook?
It's just a paperback, and it's available most places, but not Amazon. Amazon, for some reason, have decided they don't want to stock it, and my distributor, Central Books, can't tell me why. So it's a bit annoying, not least because there's nowhere sensible for people to leave a review of it. But yeah, if you just type the title, Real Path to Ecocivilization, you should be able to find it. In the United States, it seems to be a bit more difficult to find, but you can find it on a website called Bookfinder. So if you type in Bookfinder and you go to Bookfinder and type in the ISBN, it will go and check all of the booksellers in the United States or wherever you are, and it will tell you somewhere that sells it. So yeah, it's available via nearly all of the normal channels, but not Amazon.
Okay.
Actually, I'm not that bothered about it. I mean, a little bit less profit for Amazon.
Yeah, and do you have any social media or any platforms where we can learn more about you?
Yes, go to my website. It's called the Ecocivilization Diaries, which is
okay. Is that
about all of the stuff I've been talking about today?
Is that ecocivilizationdiaries.com?
Is it .com or .net? If you just type in the Ecocivilization Diaries into Google.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. Great. Thanks, Geoff.
Our house to hot house, the world of glass. glacial rhythms forget us as we forgot them.